The silence in the back office of Ross's Italian restaurant was absolute. 2:13 in the morning. Snow hammered against the windows in waves, the wind screaming through Los Angeles streets like a wounded animal clawing at glass. Luca Bianchi stood motionless before 3 security monitors, his hand gripping the desk edge so hard the mahogany cracked beneath his knuckles. His fingers were long, his nails immaculate, his Rolex catching the glow of the screens, a watch that cost more than most people's cars. Behind him, Rocco and Pietro exchanged a look they had never exchanged before in 15 years of service. Their boss was trembling. On the center monitor, footage from 17 hours earlier played in grayscale. A woman in the restaurant kitchen, her body twisted at an impossible angle, positioned like a shield between a small girl and a raised fist. The woman's face was already swollen, one eye sealed shut by bruising the color of storm clouds. She wore a uniform that had been white once. Now it was stained with things no uniform should hold. The child, no more than 5 or 6 years old, pressed against her back, small hands gripping her waist. The raised fist belonged to a man Luca would learn the name of soon enough. Not soon enough. What made Luca's breath catch, what made his jaw clench until his teeth ached, was this: the woman on the screen had nothing. She was homeless. She was beaten. She was one eye away from blindness and one more punch away from internal bleeding. And still she moved to shield the child. Still she made herself larger. Still she whispered something Luca could not hear through the security feed, something that made the little girl stop crying. Luca rewound the footage. Watched it again. Rocco, his voice came like venom through a silk filter, pull everything. From the moment she entered the restaurant to the moment she left. Every second. Every angle. I want to know what happened before this. I want to know what happens after. Rocco moved immediately, fingers flying across the keyboard. The sound of keys clicking filled the office like rainfall on a tin roof. Pietro did not move. He was watching his boss's face, and what he saw there frightened him more than any rival family ever could. And Pietro, Luca continued, his dark eyes never leaving the screen, I want to know who she is. Name. Social security number. Every address she has ever lived at. Every shelter she has slept in. Every cop she has called who did not answer. I want her history in my hands before the sun rises. Luca's finger trembled as he rewound the footage again. And again. The woman shielding the child. The fist frozen in mid-motion. The moment where she whispered those words to a child who was not hers. In 15 years, Rocco said quietly, still typing, I have never heard you speak like this. Luca did not respond. He was staring at the grayscale image of a woman who owned nothing, who had been beaten into invisibility, who had still chosen to be brave. I would rather burn in hell, Luca whispered, and his voice was breaking like old ice, than let another woman suffer the way my mother did. The room went perfectly still. Pietro's hand went to his chest, the automatic gesture of a man crossing himself without quite remembering why. In all his years, he had never heard those words from Luca Bianchi. He had heard threats. He had heard orders. He had heard laughter that made grown men weep. But he had never heard pain. The wind outside screamed louder, and snow accumulated against the windows like the city was trying to seal them inside this moment, this truth, this terrible reckoning. What neither of them knew was that this moment captured in grainy black and white would set in motion a cascade of events that would shake Los Angeles to its foundations. That the woman on the screen would become the reason Luca Bianchi dismantled his own empire and rebuilt it in her name. That the small girl named Emma would sleep without nightmares for the first time in her life because of what happened next. But before any of that, before the federal agents arrived at dawn, before Douglas Hale collapsed to his knees begging for a mercy that would not come, before Cordelia Blackwood's empire of cruelty burned to ash on every news channel in the country, before all of that, there was a beginning. A frozen night, 22 hours earlier. And a woman named Mia Voss who was trying very hard not to freeze to death. The blizzard had come to Los Angeles like a stranger with a gun, unexpected and unforgiving. Mia sat in the driver's seat of her 2004 Honda Civic, her breath fogging the windshield in small, desperate clouds. The engine had died 3 miles back. She had coasted to the shoulder of the 405 freeway just as the storm accelerated from rain to something worse, something that belonged in mountains or tundras, not in the city where she had been hiding for the past 4 months. Hiding. That was the word her mother used to use. Her mother, who had also hidden. Her mother, who had hidden so well that no one found her until it was too late. Mia pulled her grandmother's recipe book closer to her chest. It was the only thing in her backpack worth keeping. Everything else, the 3 changes of clothes, the toiletries she had sharp-lifted from CVS, the sleeping bag with the broken zipper, these things were replaceable. This book was not. The margins were filled with her grandmother's handwriting. Notes about which dishes Mia's mother had loved as a child. Adjustments for when money was tight. A recipe for soup that cost less than $5 and could feed 6 people. Mia was $34 away from knowing how she would eat next week. $34. She had counted it 17 times. Her left eye was swollen shut, the skin around it the color of rotting fruit. Her throat bore the marks of hands that had belonged to Douglas Hale, her ex-boyfriend of 3 years, the man who had hunted her through 2 counties and 3 different shelters with the kind of patience that only came from knowing he would never face consequences. His cousin was a detective in Santa Monica. His brother had connections. When she called 911 3 weeks ago, the call went nowhere. When she called again yesterday, she was told she was being hysterical. That men like Douglas Hale did not hurt women. That if she pressed charges, she would regret it. The wind pressed against the car with the weight of something alive and angry. Mia's phone battery was at 2%. She had used the last of her data looking up the address of Haven House Shelter on the east side. 3 miles from here. She could walk it if the wind did not kill her first. She could walk it if her left eye did not make depth perception impossible. She could walk it if she was the kind of person who still believed in forward motion. Instead, she sat in the cold car with her grandmother's recipe book and waited for the engine block to freeze solid. The snow accumulated on the windshield. Within minutes, she could see nothing but white. The world had closed around her. The freeway had emptied because anyone with sense was home, warm, wrapped in the kind of safety that came from having a home to be wrapped in. Mia's phone buzzed. 2% became 1%. A text message from a number she did not recognize, "I know where you are." The 405-mile marker 47. "You can run but I will find you again. I always find you. Come home and we can fix this. I love you." She blocked the number. It would not matter. He would find another phone, another contact, another way to press himself into her life like a blade into soft tissue. Through the fog on the windshield, she saw headlights. Red and white and impossibly far away. A car passing on the other side of the freeway, heading south. The world continued for other people. People who had not made the mistake of loving the wrong person. People who had jobs and apartments and names in their phone contacts for people who actually answered when they called. Her phone went black. Outside, the wind did not ease. If anything, it intensified, finding gaps in the car's weather stripping, pressing cold air against her skin like fingertips. Mia pulled her grandmother's recipe book even closer. She opened it to a random page, beef bourguignon, a dish her grandmother had made only on Christmas, a dish that required burgundy wine and 7 hours of slow cooking and ingredients that cost more than Mia made in a week. In the margin, in her grandmother's careful cursive, "When life tastes like ash, give people something that tastes like love. It is the only rebellion available to us." Her grandmother had been wrong about that. Rebellion tasted like leaving. Rebellion tasted like running. Rebellion tasted like sitting in a broken car on a frozen freeway at 2 in the morning, waiting to see if you would make it to tomorrow. The wind howled. Snow buried the car deeper. And 3 miles south, at an intersection where the freeway met Sepulveda Boulevard, the lead car of a convoy of black SUVs slowed as their driver spotted something unusual on the shoulder. A vehicle, isolated, lights off, half buried in snow. Inside the front SUV, a man with silver threading through his dark hair leaned forward. His suit was charcoal, tailored in Milan, worth more than the car being buried in snow. His hands bore the scars of a life spent building empire through means the law would never understand. He wore a gold signet ring on his right hand and a Rolex on his left wrist, the same Rolex he would have on at 2:13 a.m. in Ross's back office, staring at security footage. His name was Luca Bianchi. He had never saved anyone in his life. He was about to change that. "Stop the car," he commanded. The driver did not ask why. In Luca's organization, questions were a form of insubordination. The convoy pulled over. Luca stepped out into snow that came up to his ankles. He wore no coat despite the cold. A man like him did not acknowledge weather, did not acknowledge pain, did not acknowledge the small human needs that made ordinary people weak. He approached the abandoned car slowly, each step deliberate, each movement controlled by a will that had bent cities to his purpose. Through the frosted window, he saw a shape. Small. Female. Wrapped around something clutched to her chest like it was the last valuable thing in her life. He did not know yet that it was. Luca opened the car door. Mia Voss sat shivering in her 1998 Honda Civic as the blizzard consumed the world outside, wind screaming like something alive and angry, snow piling against the windshield in relentless waves. The engine had died 40 minutes ago. The heat had followed shortly after. Her left eye throbbed with a dull purple ache, swollen half shut from this morning when Douglas Hale's fists found her outside the women's shelter on 5th Street, found her despite the locked doors and the counselors and the promises that she would be safe there. She would never be safe anywhere. Not while he breathed. In her lap, $34. 3 $10 bills and 4 ones. Everything she owned in the world. Her bank account had been empty since the eviction notice last month. Her credit cards had maxed out 2 years ago. The job at the diner paid minimum wage and the manager stiffed the waitresses on tips whenever he felt like it, which was always. She had eaten a single apple today. Maybe a cup of coffee if she counted that. On the passenger seat sat her backpack. Inside, 2 changes of clothes, worn thin at the elbows and knees. A toothbrush with bristles that had started to fray. And her grandmother's recipe book, leather-bound and filled with handwritten notes in the margins, the only thing she had refused to sell when the pawn shop started calling. Her grandmother had written beside a recipe for risotto, *, make this when someone you love comes home tired. Let them know they are not alone. *, Mia had never made the risotto. She had never had anyone to make it for. She had called 911 twice today. The first call came at 7 in the morning, her voice shaking as she described the bruises forming on her throat. The dispatcher's tone had shifted immediately, became cool and professional, assured her that units were on the way. None came. The second call, at noon, got the same result. Nothing. Douglas had friends in the Los Angeles Police Department. Good friends. The kind of friends who made reports disappear into silence, who understood that some women were not worth protecting. She had run through 3 shelters and 2 counties in the past 8 months. Every time she thought she had finally put enough distance between herself and him, every time she believed she could breathe, he would find her. Outside the community center in Long Beach. At the bus station in Pasadena. Waiting in the parking lot of a grocery store in Inglewood with that smile on his face, the one that said he had never stopped hunting, that finding her was as natural as breathing. So she ran again. She always ran. But her money was gone. Her options had collapsed. And now the car had died on Interstate 10, eastbound shoulder, and the temperature was dropping below freezing and the wind was tearing at the vehicle like it wanted to rip it open and pull her out into the snow. Headlights cut through the white chaos. Not a single car. A convoy. 3 black SUVs moving in perfect formation through the blizzard like sharks gliding through an ocean of white, their engines rumbling deep and deliberate. Mia's breath caught. Men who drove cars like that did not stop for broken-down Honda Civics belonging to homeless women with $34 and a swollen eye. She shrank down in the front seat, pulling her thin jacket tighter, heart hammering against her ribs like it wanted to escape. The lead SUV slowed. The brakes whispered. It stopped directly in front of her car, engine idling, exhaust rising into the freezing air. A door opened, and Luca Bianchi stepped out into the screaming wind. He was tall, 6'2", with the kind of broad shoulders that came from deliberate work rather than genetics, from a life spent building something through means that the law would never understand. His suit was charcoal grey, tailored in Milan, cut so precisely that it moved with him like a second skin. Beneath it, a white silk shirt with the first 3 buttons undone, revealing the muscled contours of his chest. His dark hair had silver threading through it at the temples, deliberately grown into that pattern, a man of 47 who had earned every grey strand through violence and ambition. His face was sharp, high cheekbones, a jaw like stone, and eyes the colour of storm clouds. A scar ran from his left temple to his cheekbone, thin and pale, almost beautiful in the way that weapons are beautiful. On his right hand, a gold signet ring bearing the Bianchi crest. On his left wrist, a Rolex Submariner that cost more than the car Mia was sitting in. He wore no coat despite the cold. A man like him did not acknowledge weather. He did not acknowledge pain. He did not acknowledge the small human needs that made ordinary people weak and breakable and afraid. He approached her car slowly, each step deliberate and controlled, each movement carrying the weight of someone who had bent cities to his purpose, who had men who would die at a single word, who had learned to communicate not with language but with silence and the promise of what his silence contained. Through the frosted window, he could see her shape. Small. Female. Curled around something clutched to her chest like it was the last valuable thing in her life. He opened the car door. The cold rushed in immediately, a wall of wind that made Mia flinch. He leaned down, and she could smell him, expensive cologne, something Italian and clean, and underneath that the scent of leather from his jacket. His eyes assessed her in a single moment, took in the swollen eye, the dark bruises on her throat, the way her hands trembled. His expression did not change. "The car will not start," she said. Her voice came out barely above a whisper, shattered like glass. "I have been calling for help but—" "Where are you going?" His voice was deep and solid like an oath, carrying the faint accent of someone who had grown up speaking Italian before English, before the world taught him that power had no nationality. "The East Side," she said. "To the shelter on Mendes Street. They have a bed tonight if I can reach them before curfew." "But the car." "You are not going to the shelter," he said. It was not a suggestion. It was not even a question. It was a statement delivered with the certainty of someone accustomed to the world arranging itself according to his will. Behind him, she could see 2 men in dark suits standing beside the second SUV, watching. Waiting. Their stillness had a quality to it that made her stomach tighten. These were not ordinary men. These were men trained in violence, men who understood hierarchy, men who would not stand in freezing weather unless their boss commanded it. "I do not have money," she said. "I cannot pay you." "No," he agreed. "You cannot." He reached down and picked up her backpack from the passenger seat, his movements careful and deliberate, as though she were made of something fragile that could shatter. "What is your name?" "Mia. Mia Voss." "Mia," he repeated, and the way he said it made it sound like a name that mattered, like it was a word he wanted to remember. "Get in the first SUV. Pietro will take you to get warm. You will not speak to anyone about this. You will not call anyone. You will not tell anyone where you are. Do you understand?" She nodded, unable to form words. He straightened, still holding the backpack. His eyes found her swollen eye, the fingerprints on her throat, and something shifted in his expression, a tightening around the eyes, a coldness that seemed to drop the temperature even further. When he looked back at her, there was something dangerous in his gaze, something that made the 2 men beside the SUV take an involuntary step backward. "Someone hurt you," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she whispered. "Tell me his name." And standing there in the freezing wind with this powerful stranger asking her to reveal the one thing she had been taught never to speak aloud, Mia Voss understood that something in her life had changed. She did not yet understand that it had changed forever. She did not yet know that the man standing before her had built an empire on the principle that those who preyed on the vulnerable needed to be removed from the world with absolute precision. She did not know that his childhood had been spent watching his own mother absorb violence from his father, that he had made a vow before she died that he would never allow another woman to endure what she had endured. But as she opened her mouth to speak Douglas Hale's name into the freezing air, as she heard her own voice finally giving it sound and weight and reality, something shifted in Luca Bianchi's chest. A coldness. A certainty. A decision being made that would reshape the next 3 weeks of both their lives. "Douglas Hale," she said. He did not respond. He simply turned and walked back toward the first SUV, her backpack in one hand, his phone already in the other, and she heard him speak 2 words in rapid Italian to someone on the other end of the line before he climbed into the passenger seat and closed the door. The convoy began to move. Mia's car was left behind in the snow, frozen and empty, a vessel that had carried her this far and could carry her no further. And beside the freeway, in the gathering darkness and the falling snow, the wind howled like something that knew more than she did, like it had been waiting all along to deliver her here, to this moment, to this man, to the choice that would determine everything that came after. The steam rose from the pasta in white ghostly wisps. Mia stared at the carbonara like it might vanish if she looked away too long. Real pasta. Not the dollar store ramen from the shelter, not the stale bread she'd stolen from a bakery dumpster 3 days ago. This was something made with care, with ingredients that cost money, with a kind of attention she hadn't experienced in years. "Eat," Luca said again, his voice like warm stone. She lifted the fork with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking. The first bite melted on her tongue, and something inside her chest cracked open. Not in a good way. In the way a dam cracks before it fails completely. She thought of her mother. Of Sunday dinners in a house that no longer existed. Of a time before everything became small and desperate and cold. "How long since you've had a real meal?" Luca asked. "Yesterday." Shelter had lunch. She drained the water glass in 3 swallows. That's actually good days. Some days I don't eat at all. Just walk around looking busy so nobody asks questions." Luca's jaw tightened. She watched him absorb this information the way a sponge absorbs water, completely, without reservation. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Sharpened. Become something harder underneath the gentleness. "Who did that to your face?" Mia's hand moved to her eye, to the swollen tissue the color of old plums. The reflex was automatic, defensive. She had learned 1,000 ways to be small, to take up less space, to apologize for her own existence. "He doesn't like that word," she said finally. "Ex? Douglas Hale." It wasn't a question. She nodded anyway. "How long?" Luca leaned back in the leather booth, and something dangerous flickered across his face like heat lightning. Dark. Ancient. The kind of anger that had learned patience. 2 years since I left. But he finds me. Always finds me. Her voice was barely audible now, barely a whisper against the gentle clink of silverware from other tables. 3 shelters. 2 counties. I filed a restraining order. Called the police 14 times. They take my statement and it goes somewhere to die. He has cops on his payroll. He's got money. Connections. I'm nobody. I don't matter. The server appeared with another basket of bread, and Luca waved her back silently. He was focused entirely on Mia now, on the way her shoulders curved inward like she was trying to become invisible, on the handprint bruises blooming across her throat in shades of purple and black. "You matter," he said quietly. She laughed. It was a sound like glass breaking. "Do I? Because right now I have $34. That's all. $34 to my name. My car is held together with duct tape and prayers. I haven't slept in a bed in 4 months. I've got a backpack and a recipe book that belonged to my grandmother, and that's everything I own in the world. Tell me how I matter." Luca stood. Not suddenly, but deliberately, with the kind of controlled movement that came from someone who had learned to make his presence felt in rooms. He walked to a cabinet behind the bar and returned with a leather-bound book, aged, with notes scrawled in faded handwriting along the margins. "Your grandmother's?" he asked. Mia's hands flew to her backpack. The recipe book was still there, still safe. She pulled it out with the kind of care someone uses with sacred objects. The pages were worn soft from handling, stained with decades of cooking, filled with her grandmother's meticulous handwriting. "How did you?" "I saw it when you got in the car," he said. "You held it like it was the only thing keeping you alive." She looked at the book in her hands. Then at him. At this man in an Italian suit that probably cost more than she'd earned in the last 6 months, at this powerful figure who had stopped his entire convoy to pick up a woman freezing on a highway. Something in her wanted to run. Something in her wanted to stay. "Why are you helping me?" The question came out raw, unprotected. "Because I have been cold before," Luca said. "And I remember what it feels like when no one stops." He sat back down across from her. Didn't touch the food in front of him. Just waited while she ate, while she took small careful bites and then larger desperate ones, while she filled the hollow places inside herself with something warm. Between bites, he talked. Not about his empire, not about power or money or violence. He talked about Naples. About a one-room apartment where his father's fists fell like rain, where his mother covered her bruises with makeup and long sleeves. Where 8-year-old Luca had stood between them with a kitchen knife and said never again. "I was 12 when we came to America," he said. His accent thickened when he talked about this, like the old country came back into his voice. 17 when I started working. 25 when I took over what needed taking over. But the promise I made that night in Naples, when I looked at my mother's face and understood that love alone would never protect her, that promise never changed. The candlelight caught the scar running from his eye to his cheekbone. Mia had been trying not to stare at it all evening. "No child suffers like I did," he continued. "No woman endures what she endured. Not while I have the ability to stop it." Mia looked at him with her one good eye. The other was swelling shut, but the one that remained open held something like recognition. Like understanding. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to know that when I offer protection, it is absolute. Complete. There are no conditions and there are no exceptions." The kitchen door swung open behind them. A small figure appeared, maybe 6 years old, dark hair tied in a messy braid, tears streaking her face. Emma. The dishwasher's daughter who'd been sent back to help in the kitchen an hour before. The child ran straight to Mia without hesitation, buried her face in her coat like she'd found sanctuary. "Hey, hey," Mia whispered, her voice transforming into something gentle, something impossibly tender. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Emma just shook her head, held tighter. Behind the child, a man appeared in the doorway. Tall. Expensive suit tailored to perfection. Cold blue eyes that held no warmth, no humanity. Eyes like a predator's. Eyes that Mia recognized with the absolute certainty of prey seeing a hunter. "Douglas Hale." "There you are," he said, voice smooth as poison, smooth as a blade sliding into flesh. "I've been looking everywhere for you, Mia." Mia's entire body went rigid. The fork fell from her hand and clattered against the plate with a sound that felt impossibly loud. Emma whimpered and pressed harder against her. Douglas stepped further into the dining room like he owned it, like the warm golden light and the white tablecloths and the careful peace were all just backdrop for his entrance. "We need to talk," he continued. "About us. About where you've been hiding. About why you're being so difficult." His eyes never left Mia's face. Not once. Luca stood. Slowly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Rocco and Pietro materialized from the shadows near the entrance, hands moving inside their jackets in perfect synchronization. "This is a private establishment," Luca said. His voice was quiet now. Precise. Final. The kind of quiet that comes before thunder. "And you are?" Douglas asked, finally acknowledging him. "The owner." Douglas smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Then you should know that I'm here for what belongs to me. Come on, baby." He extended his hand toward Mia. "Let's go home." "She is not going anywhere with you," Luca said. Each word was separated. Weighted. A sentence structured like a law of nature, like gravity, like something that could not be argued against. Douglas laughed. Actual laughter. "You don't know who you're dealing with. I have friends. Important friends. Cops in my pocket. Judges who owe me favors. People who make problems disappear." "So do I," Luca replied. "But my friends are considerably better at it." The air between them crackled like the moment before lightning strikes. Every diner in the restaurant had stopped eating. Every eye had turned toward their corner. Violence hung in the space like a held breath. But then Emma whimpered again. A small, terrified sound. And Mia stood. Despite her shaking legs, despite the fear radiating through her like fever, despite every survival instinct telling her to stay small and silent, she stood. She positioned herself between the child and Douglas Hale like she had become a wall, like her broken body could shield something precious. "Emma, go to the kitchen," Mia said softly. "Go to your mama." Touching, Douglas sneered. "Playing hero? You couldn't even protect yourself, Mia. You're pathetic. What makes you think you can protect anyone else?" The kitchen door opened. A woman emerged. Late 40s, blonde hair styled with precision, designer clothes that whispered of wealth, smile that cut like a knife. Cordelia Blackwood. The woman who had known Douglas for 20 years, who had helped him hunt Mia across 3 counties, who had orchestrated every humiliation, every trap, every moment of despair. "Oh my God," Cordelia announced loudly, her voice carrying to every corner of the restaurant. "Is that Mia Voss? The woman who's been stalking my dear friend Douglas?" Every head turned. "Security needs to remove her," Cordelia continued, her words flowing like honey laced with arsenic. "She's unstable. Obsessed. She sleeps in her car. She shows up at places making accusations, creating scenes. It's really quite sad. Quite pathetic. The things desperate people do for attention." The shame hit Mia like a physical force. Her face burned. Around the restaurant, she felt the shift in the room's attention, the recalibration of sympathy. Cordelia had that power. That terrible, devastating power to reshape truth into fiction simply by saying it loudly enough, confidently enough, in front of enough witnesses. Emma pulled away and ran back to the kitchen. And Douglas lunged. His fist came up fast, practiced, the muscle memory of 1,000 strikes ingrained into his body. He aimed for her already injured eye, for the swollen tissue that would break easily now, that would leave her unrecognizable. But Luca's hand shot out with the reflexive speed of someone who had spent 15 years learning to read violence before it bloomed into action. His fingers wrapped around Douglas's wrist with a grip like tempered steel, like iron that had been heated and cooled and tempered 1,000 times until it became stronger than bone. The sound of impact never came. Instead, there was only the hiss of Luca's breath, the grunt of Douglas's shock, and Rocco and Pietro crossing the space in 3 strides, moving like violence made human. The wind pressed against the restaurant windows like something alive and hungry, carrying temperatures that had dropped to 17 degrees. Inside, the kitchen fell into that peculiar stillness that happens when violence has just passed through a space and left its ghost behind. Mia stood motionless near the prep station, her breath coming in shallow pools. Her left eye had begun to swell again, the skin darkening to the color of rotted plums. Around her neck, where Douglas's fingers had pressed moments ago, handprint bruises bloomed in shades of purple and gray. The other kitchen staff had retreated to their stations, their attention suddenly absorbed by vegetables that needed chopping, pans that required stirring, anything that was not her. Luca appeared in the doorway. He did not move into the room immediately. He simply stood there, watching her with the kind of stillness that made the air itself feel weighted, as if gravity had increased in the space where his presence occupied. His suit jacket hung open, revealing an expanse of chest beneath an unbuttoned white shirt. His dark eyes held something that had never been there before, not anger, not vengeance, but something deeper. Something like recognition. "Come with me," he said. His voice carried no inflection, no question embedded in the statement. Simply a statement of what would happen next, the way one might describe the sun rising. She did not move. Fear had crystallized inside her chest, forming a shell so complete that her body no longer answered to her own commands. Douglas was still out there. He knew where she was now. He would wait. He always waited. Mia. Luca's use of her name seemed to break something open in the moment. "Look at me." When she did, his eyes held hers with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. "He will not come back tonight. I promise you this. But you cannot remain here where he knows to find you." "You don't understand," she whispered. Her voice sounded like something broken, like a string pulled too tight and snapped at its center. "He has police on his payroll. He has money. He has connections that run deeper than mine." Luca tilted his head slightly. "No, Mia Voss. I do not think so." He stepped toward her, and every instinct in her body screamed at her to run. But his hands remained open, palms forward, a gesture of surrender rather than threat. He moved like someone approaching a wounded animal, all measured movements and careful distances. "My office," he said. "You will stay there. You will be safe. And in the morning, we will discuss what happens next." She followed him through corridors she had never known existed, through a kitchen that seemed to stretch impossibly long, up a narrow staircase that spiraled upward into darkness. His men appeared like shadows at each landing, Rocco at the top, Pietro at the turn, their presence a wall between her and the outside world. The office was nothing like she expected. She had imagined something austere, all black leather and intimidation. Instead, she found herself in a room lined with books. A leather sofa sat against one wall, deep and inviting. A desk of rich mahogany occupied the far corner. And on the walls, photographs. Dozens of them. A young boy, dark-haired and solemn. The same boy as a teenager, then as a young man. Always that intensity in the eyes, even as a child. "Rest," Luca said. "There is a bathroom through that door. Towels. Clean clothes from my collection, they will be large, but they will be clean. Sleep if you can." She sank onto the sofa, and he disappeared. The silence that followed was so complete it pressed against her eardrums. She waited for hours, listening to the sounds of the restaurant winding down. Glasses being washed. Chairs being stacked. Conversations in low voices. The storm outside had not lessened. If anything, it had intensified. The wind now howled like something in pain. Around midnight, exhaustion pulled her under like a riptide. She curled on the sofa, her grandmother's recipe book clutched against her chest like a child. In the margins of the worn pages, her Wheeler's handwriting in fading blue ink, "Add more garlic, always more garlic." And on another page, "This one is for celebrations." And near the back, dated 32 years ago, "Made this the day you were born, sweetheart. May you know joy in abundance." Her grandmother, who had survived war and poverty and the deaths of nearly everyone she loved, had still written about celebrations. Still believed in abundance. Mia slept the sleep of someone whose body had finally accepted that running could stop for a few hours. At 2:13 a.m., Luca sat in the security office 3 floors above her. The monitors displayed feeds from every corner of the restaurant. He pulled up the kitchen footage from earlier, rewound it to 7:34 p.m., and watched what had transpired in the space of 4 seconds. He watched Mia see Douglas's body shift, watched her read the violence that was coming. He watched her move, not away, but toward Emma. Her arms opened like wings. Her body positioned itself as a shield between the child and danger. He watched her become a wall. Rocco entered without knocking. In 15 years of working for Luca Bianchi, he had learned to read silence the way sailors read water. And the silence in this room was the particular silence of a decision being made. "What do you need, boss?" Rocco asked. Luca did not turn from the monitors. He simply spoke, each word a nail being hammered into something that could not be undone. "I want everything. Bank records. Property transfers. Every corrupt officer Douglas has paid. Every woman who filed a report that disappeared. Every shell corporation. Every penny that moved through every illegal channel. And I want it before dawn." And the woman, Cordelia Blackwood. Pietro had appeared in the doorway, as if summoned by the temperature drop in the air. Her too. Every threat. Every conversation. Every orchestrated humiliation. Everything. Pietro shifted his weight. "Boss, if we move on Hale, he will retaliate. His connections run deep." The lapped. "I did not ask for an assessment of risk," Luca interrupted. His voice had not risen. It had done something more dangerous. It had become colder. "I gave you an order. Will you question me again?" "No, boss." By 4:06 a.m., they had compiled what amounted to a fortress of evidence. Douglas Hale's empire of corruption laid bare like an anatomist's specimen. 3 women's names. 3 police officers' names. Wire transfers totaling $470,000. Cordelia Blackwood's recorded voicemails, her typed messages, her involvement in every calculated cruelty. Luca made one phone call at 4:15 a.m. to FBI Special Agent Marcus Chen, a man from his past, a man who owed him a debt that had accumulated like interest over 7 years. "I have something for you," Luca said when Chen picked up, his voice alert despite the hour. "Everything you need to construct a 40-year federal sentence. Along with evidence of police corruption. Multiple officers. Are you interested?" "Send it," Chen said. The raid began at 5:48 a.m. 12 federal agents in tactical gear breached Douglas Hale's penthouse apartment with the precision of surgery. Flashbangs. Shouted commands. The metallic snap of handcuffs closing around wrists. He was led out at 6:15 a.m., right as the morning news crews arrived. Someone had ensured the cameras would be there, someone who understood that public destruction served a purpose that darkness could not achieve. Douglas Hale, face ashen, was photographed in federal custody on every major morning newscast. 40 years without parole. At 7:22 a.m., agents arrived at Cordelia Blackwood's estate in Pacific Palisades. She answered the door in a silk robe the color of champagne, coffee cup suspended in one hand. Her world ended in the time it took to read her rights. What she had built, the friendships, the social standing, the carefully curated image, collapsed like a house constructed from tissue. Within hours, her country club memberships were revoked. Within a day, the media outlets that had once reported her charity galas now reported her conspiracy charges. Her children stopped answering her calls. The Empress of Cruelty had become a footnote in a scandal. Meanwhile, at 3:56 a.m., while the raid preparation was still underway, Mia woke in the darkened office. The storm had not ceased. If anything, it had grown more violent. Rain hammered the windows with the sound of gravel being thrown. She stood on unsteady legs and walked to the glass. Outside, the Los Angeles streets were transformed into something unrecognizable. Snow, actually snow, which Los Angeles never received, lay in drifts across the parking lot. The wind howled like something wounded. She thought about Douglas finding her. About running again. About the $34 in her wallet, now surely found and taken by someone, or left behind in the chaos. Her hand moved to the window latch. For one moment, just one, she considered what would happen if she simply opened it. If she walked out into the storm and kept walking. If she stopped running not by reaching safety, but by ceasing to move at all. Her fingers touched the cold metal of the latch. The weight of the backpack against her leg brought her back. Inside it, pages filled with her grandmother's handwriting. "Made this the day you were born, sweetheart. May you know joy in abundance." Her abuela had survived horrors that Mia could not comprehend. Yet she had still written about celebrations. Still believed in a future that contained joy. Mia stepped back from the window. Sat down. And waited for dawn, her recipe book held close against her chest like a prayer. 6 months later. Ross's kitchen flooded with afternoon light, the kind that turns everything golden and honest. 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Mia stood at the marble prep counter with her grandmother's recipe book open, its pages yellowed, margins filled with handwriting in faded ink. 2 line cooks watched her hands move through the motions of osso buco, the slow braise, the care, the love built into each layer. Her hair was clean, pulled back in a tight professional ponytail. The bruise around her left eye had vanished completely. The handprints on her throat had faded to nothing. She wore white chef's coat with her name embroidered in black script across the chest. Mia Voss. Not invisible anymore. Not nobody. In the corner booth, Emma sat at a small table doing third-grade homework. 7 years old now, her dark curls falling across her notebook. She had not stopped drawing since that night, pictures of kitchens, of Mia, of colors she said were for sad days. Every few minutes she looked up, found Mia at the counter, smiled, and returned to her work. The back door opened. Cold air rushed in carrying the smell of rain. Luca entered, snow melting from his cashmere coat. He moved through his restaurant like a general surveying a battlefield, but when he saw Emma his entire body softened. She launched herself at him, and he caught her effortlessly, lifting her high. For a moment the dangerous man disappeared completely. Only the protector remained. "How is my favorite girl today?" His voice dropped an octave. Gentler. Different. "I got an A on my spelling test," Emma announced. "And Mia said if I keep it up she'll teach me to make tiramisu." Did she now? He set Emma down and looked at Mia across the kitchen. "That is quite an honor. Tiramisu is sacred." "Your grandmother taught me," Mia said quietly. "I figured it was time to pass it on." Luca nodded. Something flickered behind his eyes. Approval. Pride. Something deeper that he would not name out loud, not yet. That evening they sat in the private booth. His regular table, which had become their table over 6 months. The booth where he conducted business in the early days, where men who owed him money had trembled across from him. Now it held only candlelight and conversation. Not romantic. Not yet. But something deeper. 2 people bound by shared darkness, by the worst nights of their lives, by the choice to rescue each other when the world looked away. "Douglas Hale's trial starts next month," Luca said, his voice like an oath carved from stone. "Federal court. 40 years minimum. He will die in prison." Mia cut into her pasta but did not eat. "And Cordelia?" "Everything seized. Bank accounts frozen. Her social circle abandoned her within the first week. She is working as a receptionist in Bakersfield now. Makes $12 an hour." He paused. "A different kind of prison, perhaps. Longer and harder than bars. Justice. Not death. Something that lasted." Mia set down her fork and looked at him across the candlelight. His face was scarred from the left eye down the cheekbone, a map of violence he had survived. His eyes were dark as stone, but they watched her now the way a man watches something precious. Something fragile. "I never thanked you," she said quietly. The words felt too small for the weight they carried. "You do not need to thank me for doing what was right," Luca replied. "But I do. Because most people wouldn't have stopped. Most people would have driven past a broken car in a blizzard and forgotten about it by morning." Luca was quiet for a long moment. The restaurant hummed around them, the soft clink of glasses, the murmur of other diners, the low thrum of an Italian jazz recording from the 1960s. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, gentle white flakes drifting past the windows. "You know what broke my heart on those security cameras," he said finally. "Not the violence. Not Douglas holding a knife to your throat. Not Cordelia's conspiracy. It was watching you, beaten, homeless, with $34 to your name, still choose to shield a child from harm. That is not something I see often in my world, Mia. That kind of courage. That kind of love for a stranger. I couldn't let him hurt Emma. I know. That is why you are still here. That is why you always will be." He reached across the table, took her hand gently. His grip was warm. Solid. "I need you to understand something. When I saw you on that highway, I did not save you because I am good. I saved you because you reminded me what it means to be good. You reminded me why I did all of this in the first place." Mia felt tears forming but did not look away. "Why did you do it? The empire, the power. Why? I grew up in poverty like yours. My father was violent. My mother worked 3 jobs and still we starved. When I was 16, a man offered me a choice: keep starving with honor, or eat with blood on my hands. I chose blood." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "I told myself it was to protect my family. But after my mother died, after my sister married and left, I realized I had built a fortress of gold and guns to keep myself from ever being powerless again. I did not build it to protect anyone. I built it to punish a world that had hurt me. And now? Now I know different. Now I know you protected Emma with nothing. No money. No power. Just your body between her and harm. That is true strength. That is what I should have been building toward all along." The snow continued falling outside. The kind of November snow that Los Angeles rarely received, each flake a miracle, a transformation of the ordinary city into something made of dreams. Mia squeezed his hand. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we decide together. You have a job, $47,000 a year, remember? You have an apartment above a bakery where Emma is safe and can walk to school. You have skills that took me decades to find in my chefs. But more than that, you have something my entire empire could never purchase." He paused. "You have character. You have honor. You have the ability to love people who have nothing to give you in return. Luca, I am not asking you for anything yet," he said quietly. "Just let me stay. Let me learn from you what it means to be human again. Let Emma know that there are men in the world who will catch her when she falls. Let me prove to you that what we survived together means something." Outside, the snow accumulated in drifts. The city below them fell quiet under its white blanket. Inside the restaurant, candles flickered. Somewhere in the kitchen, a radio played a song from another era, the kind of music Herb Wheeler used to sing. Mia thought of the highway. The blizzard. $34 and a recipe book. She thought of the moment Luca's black convoy found her, and how his eyes had seen her as something more than broken. She thought of the night in his office when she had stood at the window, one hand on the latch, ready to disappear into the storm. She thought of how Emma's small voice calling her name had brought her back. "Okay," she whispered. "Stay." Luca nodded slowly. "I have waited my entire life for permission to stay somewhere. I have been grateful for it." The next morning arrived clear and cold. The snow had stopped. Los Angeles emerged transformed, white and clean and full of possibility. Mia woke in the small apartment above the bakery on Silver Lake Boulevard, early light streaming through the windows. Emma was still asleep in her room. She had a room now. Her own space. Her own bed. Security. Mia pulled on her chef's whites, braided her hair, and thought about the woman she had been 6 months ago. Invisible. Hunted. Starving. A ghost moving through the world unnoticed. That woman felt like a dream now. A different person from a different lifetime. She packed her grandmother's recipe book carefully in her backpack, not because she needed to run, but because it was precious. Because it had survived everything she had survived. Because it held proof that somewhere in her family's history, someone had believed in joy enough to write recipes for celebration. The bakery below was already producing the smell of fresh bread. Sourdough. Ciabatta. The kind of smell that meant home. That meant survival. That meant the people you love have made sure there is something to eat. Mia stood in her small kitchen and decided to bake something for Luca. Something her abuela taught her before she died. Not osso buco. Something sweeter. Something that said without words what she could not yet speak out loud. As she measured flour and cracked eggs and folded butter into dough, she heard footsteps on the stairs outside. Emma, calling for her. The child still had nightmares sometimes. Still woke up terrified, reaching for Mia to confirm she was real, alive, present. Mia opened the door and Emma crashed into her, small arms wrapped tight around her waist. I had a dream, Emma whispered. That you left. I am here, Mia said, and meant it like a prayer. I am not going anywhere. Family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. If this story moved your heart, drop a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories about second chances and the people brave enough to take them. Tomorrow brings a new story. A new life changed. A new reminder that sometimes the darkest nights lead to the brightest dawns. Leave a comment below and tell us, have you ever been saved by a stranger's kindness? Or have you been the one who stopped to help when no one else would? Your story matters. Share it with us. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We wish you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. No matter how hard life gets, remember that after the rain, the sky always clears. We will see you again in the next video. Goodbye, and thank you.